Good afternoon, everybody. We are doing another live. So, back on afternoon time for me. So, I've had quite the day. I started a seminar today. So, I'm a little bit less energetic than I was yesterday for my morning live, but I feel like I've got enough energy to keep things going. Just gonna wait for my friend Matt to join, and then we will go ahead and get started. How's everybody doing so far? Let's see if I can get. I see someone requested to join, but it wasn't Matt. So what has everyone been up to today? You can leave some comments in the comment section so I can read them. It's actually really hot in here today, so I'm trying to kind of stay cool. There we go. Got my fan going in the background. Hopefully it's not too loud for the live. Hey,
Hey, how are you?
good, how are you?
Good. I've not seen you in forever. How are
Uh, it's 2020. I'm surviving.
you going? I think we all are.
I'm doing my best. Finally, not working like I'm still virtual, but I'm in an office now, so
That's
it's
good.
nice. I get to escape from my home and come somewhere else and see what the world's doing out there.
That's good. I had to make like a makeshift office here, like the corner of my apartment, which is wonderful.
So you get to do the travel from your bedroom to another room in the house to work.
Yeah, I mean, I used to travel all the time, but now the first time I traveled for work for like a speaking gig was last week for the first time I was down in Virginia, and it felt so nice to be like in front of people again.
Yeah, I went from training everyone face to face to having like large groups of people that I interacted with to now I kind of just spin in my chair and I talk to like 50 people on a screen instead.
So you get it. You know it.
It's great.
Hmm. That's fun.
Awesome. So I will go ahead and let you kind of introduce yourself and like what you do for a living, and then we can just go ahead and jump into a discussion.
Sure. Well, first of all, Ben, thank you so much for letting me hop on. Hi, everyone who's listening. Uh, my name is Matt O'Neill. I am Chief Experience Officer for an organization called Beyond Insurance. And so we focus primarily on the insurance industry, but our core focus is understanding how to take a commoditized industry like insurance, an industry that typically no one really likes dealing with, no one really likes dealing with insurance agents, but making it palatable for people that they're serving. So we spend a lot of time understanding the customer experience, how to sell effectively, but most importantly, how to make sure you add value to your customers, which I think is so important and it's such a universal task. So part of that and part of my core focus and what I've studied for a long time beyond just being a chief experience, studying like experiences of really great, interesting organizations, how do we modernize the sales process and use this new thing like social media to engage with people and followers? Because I think, like Ben, you know that for a while, I think we both have been on social media platforms trying different things, and we've kind of been following one another for so long to try and figure out like what works and what not and what doesn't. Uh, but I think it's still a very emerging concept for a lot of people. So I think that's really where this sort of started.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like a lot of businesses that were kind of already on board with this whole social media and the new world we are currently living in, I think when this pandemic hit at the beginning of this year, I think those companies definitely, you're seeing them move a lot more smooth through this whole transition to virtual life than those companies that maybe weren't already app-based or web-based.
Yeah. And there's a lot of older industries like insurance. It's not just that, but I see it in like real estate banking probably is getting hit in a very similar way. even things like car dealerships. Like there's a lot of industries that have relied on this in-person interaction to really drive new business and growth. And they've been really, that whole concept has been sidelined. So it has been very interesting to observe how different industries have been impacted beyond just the hospitality and travel industry. There are a lot of other industries that have been kind of put on hold and for interesting and unfortunate, of course.
Yeah, I think that it's crazy because a lot of people now, when you look at the youth, when it comes to social media and stuff, it's something that they weren't really taught. They didn't go to college or anything for it. It's kind of, they were there from the beginning and they've just kind of watched it grow.
Mm-hmm.
I think when it comes to companies and stuff, they are really relying on the youth. I know for my company that I'm working with, when we switched over to virtual, a lot of the youth are responsible for migrating us over to the virtual life. And it wasn't really part of like our job titles. It was
Yeah.
more along the lines of we just kind of knew how to do it naturally. So we've been kind of helping smooth that transition over. But it's not part of our job titles and we're not really getting paid any extra to do it. We're just kind of there to help. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people don't realize, like, I think when people are putting on their resumes, I don't think a lot of people include social media as something that they're good at, but it's getting to that point where companies are kind of relying on people with those strengths.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I see it a lot in small businesses. So I've worked with like very large, like national organizations that are like international, publicly traded. But then I've also worked with like the smaller, like 5, 6 person firms. And one of the things, they both have their own challenges when it comes to social media. The larger ones, they have a lot more regulation and it's a lot stricter with what they can. So it's, I mean, if you imagine it's like a cruise ship versus a tugboat, right? The cruise ship, it's going to take so hard to turn and transform and change in this new environment. But these small tugboat companies, these mom and pop small businesses, middle market companies, have so much bandwidth to be able to change, navigate, modify, grow, test things out because it's a lot more friendly and I think a lot more embraced. So, but you are right that they leave this task to these typical like 20-some-year-olds or early, like early 30s. Millennials or below, and believe it or not, even the next generation is already coming in. But they don't necessarily have like clear strategy on how to do it. So they know like, oh, if I post this on my Instagram, my friends are really going to like this. But then how do we make it so that we can keep the company name and the brand name? So it's this weird thing where they rely on the tech savvy person to do it, but then the tech savvy person was never really trained to actually have a clear strategy to help a business grow. And then the other thing that you said, which I thought was really interesting, this next generation of people coming up, are they Gen Zers, I think, right? People below millennials. I think they're Gen Zers. Sorry if I'm doing there was a lot of research done because millennials grew up app native, right? Like me and you, we grew up with we watched social media start like back with like MySpace and stuff. But
Yeah.
Next generation, that's all they know. And so there's this weird paradox that they now have on average more friends because of the virtual world, but they're also growing up with a lot more anxiety because they don't know how to engage with one another, talk in person and talk on the phone. So it's going to be this weird paradox the next generation is going to have to burden.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's a new world we're living in. We can't live off of like the old rules of how things work.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, like when you think about people who are going into school for studying this type of stuff. So like when we were in school, marketing was something, digital marketing was something, but social media marketing is its own new beast because just from like the different events that I've gone to for like YouTube and Facebook, when they hold those different conferences, it's almost like the day that you have the conference, as soon as they put out that new update, it changes all the algorithms and how you have to navigate through that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it can be really tough. I think one of the nice things about social media is it allows you to figure out what your audience likes. I think one of the biggest problems that people have, whether you're trying to brand yourself or you're trying to brand an organization, is they don't know who they're trying to target and who their target audience is. That's one of the biggest, I think, mistakes that a lot of people have. They're trying to throw out a bunch of content, but they don't actually know who the person is that's on the other side of the screen. Is it Is it someone who's super app native or really young and fresh and is going to be really interested in memes? Or is it someone who wants something a little more analytical and sophisticated? And I personally had to learn that because being in an industry like insurance, it's a much more, it's typically an older industry, right? It's much, so I'm definitely on the younger end of this industry in terms of a speaker and building brands. So I had to straddle the difference between the audience that I had growing up being so app native, but then also making sure I attract the right audience in the insurance industry. So if you look at like my profiles across like Instagram, that's going to be very different from my Twitter one, which is kind of a blend between my professional and social life. And then you get to LinkedIn, which is like super sophisticated that I absolutely love. I'm obsessed with the platform. But I know I'm probably rare in that. So I think there's just a lot of opportunity, but I think that's one of the biggest challenges is they say, all right, millennial figure it out, but they don't have the millennial the right tools so that they can understand how to actually identify who their target audience is.
Yeah, I think that because I've talked about this kind of with other people who have seen some success in the social media world. And when it comes to understanding, like when you go to like VidCon, which is a large event for YouTube, like they do have like the creator floor where you can go to conferences and they teach you how to turn your YouTube channel into a business, how to make profit off of your Instagram and Facebook. And that's a very different mindset than on the bottom floor where it's just talking to people who are your fans. And it's definitely something that I kind of had to navigate through and understand, like diving into the analytics of my channel, seeing which age groups are watching, because it is like even within my company that I work for, we've had surveys where we kind of talk about the different ages and how we communicate because we've got apps where you've got like group chats and then you've got the older generations that are still very like email oriented because we are a tech company. We try to stay away from any like written stuff, but you do see like that age gap. But one thing that I kind of wanted to bring into the conversation is I think that a lot of people, because I've had a lot of conversations with people who might have smaller followings, and I'm just like, hey, be careful what you post on the internet. That's your brand that you're creating. I don't think a lot of people realize that this is going to become like the new resume for people because our social media is like I've been granted so many opportunities just from people seeing me on Instagram or YouTube, and they were things that I never thought existed for me, being here in Virginia in the middle of nowhere. How would you start talking to people about using their social media as a way to like create themselves as a brand?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. The first thing that really comes to mind is I think a lot of people, and I had to do this myself, because as I said, I think you and I continued, I've been following you forever. I think the the kind of content that we created back when we were like in college, right? Just trying to figure out like what is the YouTube space, what is, the Facebook space, what resonates with our audience, like you said, from a personal brand perspective, I think evolves over time, especially as you um, become more of an expert in an area that really interests you. Like what we're talking about today, I think 5 or 6 years ago, you and I would not be talking about this. It would be much more like, what resonates with that audience, right? And I know we both have those compelling audiences, but we also have that business audience as well. So the biggest thing that I could say is really try and find a niche that fits in the sweet spot of, do you have an interest in it? Do you actually have expertise in it? And is there actually like a market opportunity for it? And that's really the brand that you want to try and carry. So for me, like I love, like one of my favorite things is talking to people like this, right? Like I love doing podcasts. I love doing video content. I'm not a good writer, though I do write randomly for different magazines and stuff. But I love doing interviews. And so one of the things that I find so compelling about my role is I get to go in and actually understand what makes an organization tick through like interviewing and like just meeting people and saying, from your perspective, customer, what are your expectations of this brand or this organization? So I do think that there needs to be a bit of a transition, but I think that comes naturally as people begin to learn what their unique strengths are and what their natural gifts are, right? Like I did not know 5 or 6 years ago that it's the fact that I strategy and I love talking to people, that's really what also is making me very successful in the job I have today. So I think that just comes with time. But I think that doing some sort of an audit of your social profiles is incredibly important, because I do think over time your college photos should maybe be just fine a little bit. That was the experience for me. Um, and then the other thing, when you mentioned like small followings, I don't think anyone should ever really compare themselves to someone else. So, I mean, I know people that have 50, 60, 70,000 followers across their social platform. Let's call it their social clout. But they can't actually get their followers to take any type of action, right? Like they're just there. And that's one thing that I've been very careful with, is making sure that the people that follow me are following me for the content that I have. And it's okay if people stop following me when I start posting about how to actually make yourself more successful, or how to, build your brand, or how to make your company make more money, right? Because if they're unfollowing me, then they're not going to be the people that take action anyway. The most valuable brands online are the ones that can make their followers take action, and I think that's the most important thing. So whether if you have 200 people and you can make 150 of them take an action, whether it's donate to a charity event, or follow you this, or download this piece of content, whatever that is more valuable than someone who has 70,000 followers and can only get 50 people to take action.
Yeah, most definitely. I feel like it's we've become a society that is very like self-focused. A lot of people are very like, this is who I am and I don't care about anyone else's opinion.
Yeah.
Uh, I've always been one of those people that I've explored other people's opinions. I like to ask people like, hey, when you look at my social media platforms, like what is the like image that you would project onto me? Because I think sometimes people aren't aware of the storyline that they're putting out there for the world to read. I think that college pictures are definitely something that I would have removed. I have gone through because now that my following's growing, I am gaining people who haven't seen me from the beginning and they are scrolling back. And so when they pop up in my notifications, I'm like, oh, let's kind of remove that. That's not the storyline that I want for the people watching me now. So for people who, like you said, they're just starting and they don't really have that niche yet, what would you say, like, for people who are trying to create a brand for themselves, what are some steps that they could start to take to kind of better define their brand?
Yeah. So it's interesting. One of my mentors, something they told me about growing up is, when you're in your 20s, if you think about your professional career like your like high school, in your 20s it's like your freshman year. So like, and think about your freshman year, you're really excited, you're like going in there, you're going to do everything you can, right? But you really know nothing, right? And everyone else in the school is, they know more because they've been in school longer, right? In your 30s, it's like your sophomore year, where you're like, okay, well, we've gotten past the thrill, now we're starting to learn, we know the ropes. Junior year is your 40s, right? Now you're in your stride. And then senior year, when you're starting to like, okay, well, I'm good with this, I'm done, that's your 50s and 60s, when you're nearing retirement. So I think one important, you are in your 20s and you're listening to this, just remember that this is only your freshman year of building your brand online. So just be mindful of that. Is whatever you put out there, you may think that it is a great idea while you're in your 20s, but when you get to your 30s, you become a sophomore, and you may realize that some of those things may come back and haunt you. So you do have to be mindful of that. In terms of like getting a brand started, the most important thing is understand your medium. So like I said, I've much better camera presence than I do writing. So let me talk about how I actually take content and I can publish it in magazines and blogs, and this is how I get my name out there in the industry that I work in. So I might do, let's say this is actually a great example. Say you and I are on this, which we are. One great thing that I think you could do is, after the Instagram live, it's called content multiplication. You take this piece of content, you say, now you have an Instagram IGTV video, right? So now you can upload it to your Instagram and there becomes a piece of content there. You can also take this piece of content, save it to your iPhone, and actually download the audio, and you actually have a podcast, and you can use a free podcasting platform like anchor.fm to create a podcast. So now you didn't have to do any extra work to have a podcast episode. You can also use a website like rev.com, then you can transcribe this episode and you'll actually have a full blog. And so now you have a blog post that you can post. So that's how I create content. I'll do interviews with some some people that are much smarter than me, and I will take that piece of content and I will transform it into 6 or 7 different pieces of content. So while you may look at a specific platform and say, oh, he has X number of followers, you also have to look across the board and say, okay, well, he has X number of followers here, but he has Y number of followers on Twitter, and then he has this many LinkedIn followers. Oh, and then he just published this article that got a bunch of notoriety. So that's the type of content that you have to be mindful of. And that's how I would start. I think people find it overwhelming and they get stuck on one platform. Start with a platform that you really enjoy. Once it's your tone. Again, there's nothing wrong with blogging. There's nothing wrong with creating YouTube videos. There's nothing wrong with creating podcasts. But take that content and try and replicate it as much as you can. And I do think every single person, doesn't matter what type of industry you're in or what your career is, whether you're a creative, whether you're a professional, business world, you should have some body of work that positions you as an expert in your particular niche or field.
Yeah, most definitely. I definitely believe that when it comes to your platforms, spreading yourself out over more than just one is definitely a good thing. One thing that I've noticed is because I did pretty much start off on YouTube. Most of my audience was over there, and then I've kind of shifted because it's a lot easier to do like lives like this than all the editing and stuff on YouTube. But there are people that are like, hey, you haven't put a YouTube video up for a month now. So being able to handle both of them, I think it's important to spread yourself across as many social media platforms as possible, because there are going to be people who only really do YouTube. They don't have Instagram, depending on the age and everything like that. But I definitely think that what you're saying, being able to make one piece of work into multiple things is definitely a lot easier than trying to create on all the platforms. And because I've talked to people about like trying to switch over to other platforms to kind of communicate more with my audience, and it seemed like it was going to be a lot more work, and I've already got tons of work on my plate. So like starting something like a Patreon account to where, because now I'm getting thousands of messages here on Instagram, and it's gotten to the point where I can't even respond to everybody anymore. But I was looking into other platforms, but it's like, okay, this is a lot more work. How can I do that to where it's less work for me, but I'm able to spread myself across those platforms? And I saw that you were kind of like freezing and going in and out. Were you still able to hear?
Yeah, talking about like expanding beyond like other platforms and stuff.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I think even if you think about like YouTube, you could be taking 2 to 3 minute clips from this interview and creating really short pieces of content for YouTube by just, cropping it and throwing it into some sort of video editor and putting our faces side by side. Like there's nothing wrong with putting interviews out there of things that are really important that's going to resonate with your audience.
Yeah, most definitely. So one thing that like you were saying, once you put it out on the internet, it's kind of out there. But even if you delete it, it's still kind of out there for the world to see. We've become very opinionated in our society. I think that everyone has like chosen sides, it seems, when it comes to politics or different causes and stuff that are going on right now. Do you think that being too strong on one could hurt your brand in the end? Did you hear that part? I didn't hear you there. I still can't hear you. Nope, you're silent. I think if you leave and come back, I think that might fix it.
There we go.
There you go. Yes. Could you hear me at the end?
I could not, but it's probably because I was freezing. So,
Okay.
what was
Uh,
the
I was talking about how we've become a very opinionated society, and a lot of people are sharing their very strong opinions. I tend to share my opinion, but I still stay in the mindset of other people are allowed to have other opinions than my own. Do you believe that this very opinionated social media aspect of things can hurt people's brands?
So I think that social media can easily put you into a bubble, is what I would say. And I do think it's tough when you do not hear other people's points of view, even if you don't necessarily agree with them. I think that's one of the biggest opportunities that social media can provide, if done effectively, is to at least listen to other people, hear them out. You don't necessarily have to agree with them, uh, right, on their opinions or points of views on whatever the topic is. Uh, but just remember that whatever, if you do put out an opinion about anything, there will be people that will disagree with you. I can say the sky is blue, and you can say it's purple. It doesn't matter who's wrong. It's that's what's going to happen. So we just have to be mindful of that. We had a there was a salesperson that was kind of trashing on fast food, but he sold insurance to restaurants, and there was a fast food restaurant saw his posts, and he never trashed the restaurant itself, but he just put out such a bad image of who he was as a salesperson, and his perception of what that the fast food industry was caused him to lose his opportunity there. So he like lost his sales opportunity there. So you just have to be mindful of you just have to be mindful of that. Is any opinion is going to you're going to have people on both sides. It doesn't matter what the subject is. So I also somewhat try to hide away from that when it comes to a professional setting.
Yeah, I had a friend that went to Liberty University, which is a very large. It's I believe it's the largest Christian university in the world, actually, and he was very vocal about his religious beliefs online, and he applied to be a police officer up in DC. And DC is a very open-minded police force, and it was actually his social media with his really strong religious posts that made that department say, "Hey, I don't think you're a good fit for this city. We our team is very open-minded. We've been trying to craft a team that is very open-minded, and you just don't fit." And that came from just them viewing his Facebook posts.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't realize that that's stuff that businesses are starting to look at, because your opinions now, when you work for a company, that does reflect poorly on a company if the company's image is completely opposite of what you are posting.
Yeah, I did an interview with the first African American state trooper in Pennsylvania about a month ago, right after like the George Floyd thing, for a group of agencies, and he approached the this subject as everyone has biases, and most of them are subconscious, which is why don't actually you don't realize like that your opinion necessarily is right or wrong, right? That's why you believe that your opinion is right. But everyone has these blind spots growing up. No one and everyone has it. Like you have it, I have it. Just even having certain opinions about certain colleges may cause you to have a bias, right? Like you talked about a Christian college. There could be someone listening on here that does not like either Christianity or colleges or Christian colleges, right? That might be that their belief, and one of you may have a blind spot as to why that college is right or wrong, in your opinion. So I think to be aware that everyone has unconscious biases, and that even if you disagree with their opinion, it may just because their eyes have never been open to another point of view, and so their bias has caused them to have that type of belief or perspective on the particular matter. I think makes it much more palatable to be able to speak with someone.
Yeah, I've definitely, because I've lived in 7 different states, I've kind of gotten the taste of people from different parts of the world. And then I also got to work with like the international students when I was in college, and just talking to people and learning that the world is so different in different places, that it's really opened my mind to the facts that the values that I hold near and dear aren't necessarily near and dear to other people. And here in 2020 and back in 2016, I think that because I live in a very rural area, it's very Trump supporter and very Republican conservative. And because I am a Democrat and liberal, I've had to learn how to communicate with people who think very differently than me and still be an effective team member. And I think a lot of times, like we were saying at the beginning of this call, you were saying like the bubble that we live in. I think that it's becoming like more polarized than it is becoming a more moderate place for everyone to have a conversation. What are some things that, because when you're building a brand or a company or starting your own company, I think there should be some guidelines that people should think about before they start to become a very polarized type thing. Because there's a business around here that is, it's almost like completely, the signs on every window is just Trump 2020. And for me as a customer, I'm not even comfortable going into that building anymore because I just, as an LGBT person living in a very rural area, that signage just makes me feel like it's a very unsafe place for me to be.
Yeah. So it's interesting when you think about like things like that. Organizations, since they are classified more as people now, just over time, right? They do have more social obligations that they must meet. The the interesting thing that I would say about, like, let's use that company as an example, and you not feeling comfortable with being in there, they would understand their target customer. And just because you don't necessarily feel like you are comfortable going in there does not necessarily mean that they uh, don't have customers that do feel comfortable in there, right? Like, and that goes back to, I think, my point that not every company should be for every single person. I do think that you need to have a deep understanding of the values that your customers hold. That's really important, and that's why you make certain decisions off of what you like. That's why so like environmentally friendly companies, right? That's why like Timberland and everything. You'll see them do a lot more environmental, cost conscious, not for profits, things like that. They really focus on that content. So I think just it goes back to having an understanding of who your target customer is, and if they are trying to target LGBT liberal professionals, then their messaging is off. But if they're trying to target very patriotic people that believe in those types of beliefs or support those types of concepts, then they're targeting their messaging from an organizational perspective is spot on. So, again, it is, you have to find the smallest viable audience that will make you successful. You don't need to be for everyone. Most companies are not for everyone, but you need to find the least amount of people you need to become successful, whether you're a personal brand or a professional one. And for personal brands to make a decent amount of money, oftentimes you need like less than 100 people to really be able to find that, if you really know who you're trying to.
So when it comes to brands, I know that Patagonia just recently, in the tags of their clothing, put a very anti-Trump message on their tags.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly just found out about it because I went into a Dick's Sporting Goods here in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I just wanted to kind of get one of the jackets because I destroyed my old one and I wanted a new one. And they kind of removed that product. It's still found on their website, but it's no longer in the stores. I don't know if it's nationwide. Do you think companies like that need to be a little bit more open to both sides? Because I feel like that kind of was a very bold statement for a company like that, because I feel like a company like that, you would have people on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, again, there was a decision that was made internally at their management team that they probably did a lot of research and studied who their target audience is, and they may have decided that their audience probably leans more democratic, if that's the decision that they're making. Again, it's not right or wrong. I mean, they don't necessarily need to be right. They don't need to be the right fit for everyone. I think it's the opposite end of the spectrum of that other company that you just talked about with all the Trump memorabilia out front, right? They know their target audience. They feel they do, and they feel that those values that company wants to reflect are reflective of the people that support Trump. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, you get people like Patagonia who believe that the values of their followers, or let's call them their tribe has the values that better align with people who disagree with Trump. There's no right or wrong in either case. It's, the market, honestly, the market will decide on whether they're right or wrong. If they go out of business, then they're obviously wrong on who their target audience is.
Yeah. When it comes to places that I've worked, I was told to keep the fact that I'm LGBT out of the communication when it comes to applying for jobs, because I do live in a more rural area. But for me, LGBT is such a strong influence in my day-to-day life that that's something that I felt was very important to inform anyone within an interview process for me, because it is part of my brand, because it is something that I pretty much would be labeled as an activist for the community. Within my company, I kind of flipped the interview and just started asking. I was like, is this a place that is LGBT friendly? Is this something, like, I've worked with my company for transgender rights, which our company didn't really have anything for, which we had a transgender person interview, and instead of reaching out to HR, my company reached out to me because I'm a very vocal person within the company for being part of the LGBT. So when it comes to branding yourself, I think that it's important, but also you have to realize that it can be limiting in some ways for your personal brand. A company can choose, hey, I've got thousands of customers that are going to buy no matter what, or support this idea. But when it comes to your personal brand, I think that you have to be a little bit more aware of the places that you are applying to and how vocal you are about the things that you stand for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even when I coach and train, I don't hide the fact that I'm, also part of the community as well. I don't necessarily, it's not that I'm running into these coaching programs, standing on stage, throwing out rainbows and glitter on. Not afraid to hide the fact that I'm part of the LGBT community, because that is a big part of who I am as a person. And I'm very honored to be part of, to be able to be part of this really wonderful and diverse community that we get to participate in and add value to. But I also know that there are certain organizations, I know there's always going to be people that may not see the same point of view, and I may not see eye to them. And, if it's at that junction, then they're there for the content and not necessarily my personal views, which is why I'm not spreading it out. But the people I'm going to gravitate to are the people that are going to be more responsive to that. And that's how I'm building a tribe of people that surround me, both, that are allies, that are gay, that are, every color of the spectrum, but still want to digest the same amount of content, regardless of whether I'm part of the LGBT community or not.
So earlier you were kind of talking about how one of the things that a lot of the social media influencers and the newer generations, they kind of create content, but they're not super familiar with the idea of how to create a tribe or how to market themselves to specific groups. What are some things that they should start looking into to market themselves and start to align with a certain value of a brand?
Yeah, so it goes back to knowing who your target audience is and knowing the smallest viable audience that you actually need to build your brand and what outcomes you want. I think a lot of people create content, but they don't actually know what they want to get out of the content. So for me, I'm very conscious when I create content that that stays within my space and my wheelhouse, but I also know that on the back end, I'm hoping to drive revenue from the pieces of content that I get. So I'm very mindful anytime I write an article or publish something in a magazine that it does lead back to a call to action that drives some sort of action, even if it is just getting more eyes on our website or something. So when you're trying to figure out who you are and perhaps what your skill set is, one thing that I can recommend that I think anyone should do, and you can even say, hey, when you email this, you can even say, this random guy named Matt O'Neill told me to email this. But I would find, let's say, 5 or 6 different people that really know and respect you. I would call them raving fans. So they know you, they like you, trust you. They would go the extra mile really help you succeed. And that could be your family, it could be someone in your church community, it could be local, it could be a client, it could be a prospect, whoever it is. And email them and say, you know, Ben, I'm really trying to continue to grow professionally. And I was curious from your perspective, what is my superpower, right? What is my superpower? And again, you can say, hey, this random Matt O'Neill guy told me to email 5 on the top of my list of to ask, what is my superpower? And when I did that, I got back some really interesting responses about my ability to be flexible with who I communicate. I'm able to connect with people really well. I have good communication skills. So I began to learn a lot about myself and who I was and a lot of the soft skills that other people saw. And I think it's something very similar to what you said. Like, hey, just ask your audience, like, what resonates? What do you want to see? The other important thing is if you know the audience that you want to go after, like let's say you're trying to, like let's say I'm trying to target gay salespeople, I might find gay men and women and whoever in the LGBT community who do sales and ask them, what do you want to see? If I'm creating content, what kind of stuff do you want to see? So I don't know. I think it's a weird thing. A lot of people don't ask their target audience or the people that they're trying to brand themselves to, what do you want to see? What's appealing? That's a very easy way to figure out what type of content to create.
Yeah, I feel like for me personally, I was definitely struggling through 2020 when it came to being a social media influencer or someone that was putting opinion out during everything that was going down in 2020. I know that for me, I really had to pull back and I had to ask myself, like, what is the message that I am trying to get across? And my message was kindness. My message was acceptance, equality. And I was trying to put myself out there for the Black Lives Matter, which was something that I've never really put my foot in before. It was something that I had to really take a step back and educate myself on a lot of stuff before I felt like I could even communicate with people. And even after I fully educated myself by speaking to people within the community and letting them like point out any flaw that they saw within something I was trying to put across in a message, I realized that even after months of communicating, reading, and just educating myself, I still didn't feel comfortable making statements within that. And I was like, okay, how can I still do good? How can I still stand by the message I've always put out there and still help the people? Because I believe that that's a movement that needs as much support as possible. Everyone should stand behind it. And I found that kindness, love, acceptance, like that's something that you can put out and you don't have to tag anything specific. And because I've been doing that my entire internet career, I realized that when I stopped trying to be very specific and just made it a very broad statement, if you scroll through my posts and stuff, you'd notice that it kind of became a very broad, like positive vibes, kindness, loving people, fighting for what you believe in, but not putting any specific tone to it, because I do feel like in today's society, it is very cancel culture. It is very, you say one wrong thing and you can turn an entire crowd against you. Mm-hmm. So what's kind of your thought process along people who are just trying to do what I've been doing on social media?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to any type of topic that you don't understand or you don't feel comfortable being like a go-to person on, it's very easy to just say, look, I don't know this and I want to bring someone else on. So if your angle, if we keep using you as the example, like if your angle is kindness, love, acceptance, and you say, look, I'm not the person to be speaking about the Black Lives Matter movement. I have not studied it. I'm not gifted enough, but you can find someone who has, like how I learned a lot about it from sitting down with the first African-American state in. Like that's, I have zero authority. I have no experience talking about that because it just isn't my area of expertise. But the fact that I'm able to bring him on and speak to him about it and let him share his experiences and he trains police forces on understanding how unconscious biases can impact the police force. Now, having that type of training and being aware that, hey, you may have a bias just because you've never even learned it from, no fault of your own, just from growing up in the environment, family, geographic area, can really help change the mindset of the police force, so they know how to navigate tougher situations. So I don't think you have to be an expert in everything, but just knowing that you can bring experts on and do conversations like this, I think is super powerful.
Yeah, I've definitely really fallen in love with the idea of bringing people, because I do believe that when it comes to my audience, there's a lot of things that I would love to introduce them to. That's why I've been doing a lot of lives, because I believe we need to fill all of our news feeds up with positive thinking people, people who don't have closed minds, who are trying to explore and understand the world better instead of just assuming, like you were saying. There's a lot of things that if you've lived in an area your entire life, there's a lot of perspectives that you are unaware of. And like you were saying before as well, like social media can be used as an amazing tool to learn new perspectives, but it can also be used as a tool for hatred and closed-mindedness. I've seen so many posts here recently where people are like, if you vote for this person, unfriend me because I don't want you in my life. And I'm like, you are throwing away so many great opportunities to have conversations with people and understand a perspective that is very different than your own.
Mm-hmm.
How would you say that you've kind of used social media? Like, you've already talked about how you've used, like, speaking to the police officer. How have you kind of used it to grow, and how could people listening use it to grow past their friends, that the bubbles that they currently have themselves in?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to listening, I think. I think that's one of the most important things, but also underutilized. I mean, everyone, when we get off of this little chat, our smartphones aren't going to leave within 2 feet, right? We're going to probably put it in our pocket, or we're going to have it on the table while we're cooking dinner, whatever the situation may be. But actually listening to people, I think, is incredibly, incredibly important. It's one of my favorite things to do, is just ask people like open-ended questions. When you meet new people, I think it's very comfortable to ask people yes or no questions, right? And so you're doing obviously you're doing a really great job, because you know how to do this as well naturally, probably. But being able to ask people, like, defined by a woman named Mary Beth Kosminski, this book called Red Zone Marketing, and I absolutely loved it. She said that you have to learn how to ask people big questions, like, what is your biggest fear? What is your greatest challenge? Because what that does is it's too big for people to lie to you about. I asked you, like, how are you feeling today? And we don't really have a relationship. You say, I'm feeling fine, right? Like, if you told me, oh my gosh, my knee is killing me, I was just asking just to be nice, right? So asking these big questions can really change the way that you're actually listening to other people. What's your biggest fear? What's your greatest challenge? Even thinking about this political climate, you can ask people on the other side of the aisle, what's your biggest fear when it comes to the other party being elected? What is your biggest challenge that your current party is not delivering on when it comes to their promises, right? Because both parties are guilty of that situation. It just begins opening this dialogue where you begin learning about other people and what their fears are, what their concerns are, perhaps what makes them most excited about the next couple of months, or what do they want to do? What's the biggest things you've missed since having to be locked down during COVID? So doing that is really important. The other thing is, a good rule of thumb whenever you're speaking to someone is to know that a really great conversation is typically 85-15, meaning the other person is speaking 85% of the time, you're speaking 15%. So in business, if you can have some sort of conversation with someone, and if you play this game when you're speaking to someone, think about how long you're speaking versus the other person. It's something I focus on all the time when I'm speaking to people. If you can get them to speak for, let's say, above 15, you essentially win this little game, right? But 85-15 is a really strong conversation, and you'll be surprised at how the other person responds, because you let them open those, and that's what everyone loves to do. Everyone loves to talk about themselves.
Yeah, I've definitely, when it comes to speaking to people, I've definitely learned that you've got to be careful sharing really strong opinions without understanding the person that you're speaking to. I'm one of those people, like you're saying, I have gotten very good. It's almost, I think, natural to me when it comes to understanding people around me when I'm speaking. So for me, these types of interviews are really fun and easy because I kind of got a question in my head that I want to know about your opinion, so I'll ask it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas some other people, it doesn't come as naturally. Sometimes it may be a nervous thing where they just want to talk. They don't like any silence, so they don't want to have any of it, so they'll fill it with them speaking. But I think a lot of people are so quick to share their very, very strong opinions without first gauging the audience that they're speaking in front of. And I think when it comes to personal brands, if you are trying to sell something to someone, I think it's really important that you fully understand the person that you're selling to. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, I've been in sales for a very long time when it comes to cellular sales, and then jumping over to the YouTube platform. My own personal brand is something that I have to sell to the world. And that is something that I've kind of learned is you do have to kind of gauge the people that are watching. And sometimes like you can have a flop and you have to be able to be aware of that. Otherwise, you're going to be pushing stuff out
Mm-hmm.
that eventually people are just going to walk away from.
Yeah, absolutely. Fear of rejection things can really cripple someone when they're building their brand online. Uh, you you definitely should be, like I said, like market will, the market is going to resonate with audience or not. So I feel like everyone's talking about this cow book as well. I'm seeing in the
Yeah.
chat. I actually have a whole bunch of books sitting here off to the side. So I put it there, yeah. So that's answering someone's question about why, which is one of the core books of and philosophies that I teach to a lot of people.
Awesome. Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of those comments too. I was just like, maybe we'll get to that.
Instagram really frames it in. So
It's
this
almost
book,
like that's your book that you're advertising during this live.
yeah. Hey, you want to buy a great book? It is a very good book. So yeah, it's by someone that I really enjoy named Seth Godin. So someone else here also asked, because it's actually kind of ties into it. How do you learn how to make open-ended questions? Well, so the first thing I want you to do, Alex, is next time you're talking to someone, is I want you to think about the type of conversation you're having. And are you asking a lot of yes or no questions, or are you asking a lot of open-ended questions? And you can take a very simple yes no question and open it up by just adding a few keywords like, what is your biggest concern? What are you most excited about? These descriptors in your question will change it from are you excited to what are you most excited about? It takes a lot of practice. So um, it's an emotional intelligence trait, and emotional intelligence is something that can actually improve and get worse over time. So people over time have gotten worse with emotional intelligence because we're so used to instant gratification with notifications on our phone. So a lot of people actually lost this trait. So you do actually have to practice listening and asking open-ended questions to actually improve. So just the next time you're in a conversation, just think about the questions you're asking. Are they yes or no, or are they open-ended? And see if you can take some of those yes or no questions, even if you think about the conversation asking and think, all right, for next time, how can I ask this as an open-ended question so it gets someone to open up?
Yeah, most definitely. So I actually, within the seminars that I actually teach open-ended questions. And it's funny that you're saying like the generations are starting to lose that capability because when it comes to the younger generations in technology, they are very good at just spewing out the facts and information about it, but they lack that connection that they make through open-ended questions. And when I'm working with, because all different age groups go through my seminars, and it's interesting because the older generation actually sell more than the younger generation because instead of speaking about the tech specs and everything, they are asking questions and they sell based upon the information that they gain from the customer. And a lot of times you don't want to say, do you have kids? Do you have a husband? Are you like, what's your job? You want to ask questions that are going to get them to tell you a story. I always tell people that everyone you communicate with should be looked at as a blank canvas, and you should ask questions to where that person's going to paint their picture for you. Because if you ask tons of closed-ended questions, you're only getting one piece of information, and that's going to take forever. I always say it's like getting little pieces of sand and just putting it on that canvas, when you could just ask them an open-ended question and they're just going to spew out the story. And a lot of times you can use that information to pitch something later. So, oh, you said that you love taking pictures of your cats and you have 6 grandchildren. Like, this camera here, it's got this live feature to where you can take a picture and then kind of move it back and forth. And just from open-ended questions, you're able to gain a lot more information from the person in front of you. And I've learned it's kind of that way with like going on dates as well. I've kind of tried to flip it around. Because I'm life coaching, I try to stay away from asking too many questions because I start coming off as a life coach on a date. But the open-ended questions, it is a lot nicer to just get the people to talk instead of you constantly asking questions. Because it would be awkward on a date to just be like, so, what's your favorite color? Blue. How old are you? 29. And like having to keep that 50-50 going.
Absolutely. That makes complete sense.
What was that? You kind of cut out.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. I heard you say that makes
saying,
complete sense.
No, yeah, I know. I was saying, like, as you build up your emotional intelligence, you become more gifted in that area, in that realm. You will quickly learn who else has high emotional and can also hold an open-ended conversation, because it definitely gets much easier with other people that know how to converse that way.
Let's see. I think you're like going in and out. Like, yes, I think you're back.
Yeah. Okay. Good. For now.
Yeah. So it looks like we're getting close to the hour. So that's usually how long I've had them. My friend, we went for 2 hours the other day, so we kind of went overboard with that one. But for the people like watching, when it comes to this conversational topic, what would you say like your overall advice would be when it comes to this topic to people who are watching, to wrap it up?
Yeah. So if you want to begin building your brand, growing, understand who you want to serve, test out content and see what resonates with them, and ask them what they want to see. Those would be the 3 big things that I think would be most valuable.
Most definitely. I definitely think that when it comes to being anyone that's trying to form a brand, listening to other people that you're trying to target, it's so important. There's definitely things that I've posted out there where it didn't get as many likes, it didn't get as many views, no comments. And I was just like, okay, did this fall into the values of my brand? And a lot of times I can sit there and be like, nope, 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 didn't fall into any of those. So why am I posting this? So I think when you first start out, you're kind of throwing a lot of stuff out there to see what people grasp, but you also have to be aware, like, what is the audience that I want? For me personally, like, I don't like sexualized conversations over my social media. And I've learned that depending on the content that I put out, some people can be very aroused by things, and I try to stay away from that type of stuff because I don't like getting tons of messages in my inbox of people's pictures that I don't want to see. And I've kind of learned what I need to stay away from to avoid that type of stuff. And I think that I've found my niche when it comes to the content that I'm posting. I will forever be growing. because I'm not going to stay 32 forever. So I'm sure my knowledge as I get older will broaden in certain areas and maybe become a niche in a different area, which, I mean, that's okay. You're allowed to grow. I think that's what a lot of artists find a struggle in, is when they've got such an audience. I would say Miley Cyrus is probably one of those people. She had a very, very targeted audience, and then she made a complete shift. And I think she created a new audience, but she also left behind a large audience as well.
Exactly. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you're building your tribe. I mean, we all are, right? We continue to build our tribe and continue to grow. And as you begin to shift, what's wonderful is people are watching you on your journey as you continue to find yourself and figure out, practices and things that you can share with your audience. And I think that's also exciting. That's why the Kardashians are as successful as they are, right? They didn't do anything, but people just love watching their journey. And I think that's one of the nicest things about social media is it gives you the opportunity to tell your story and tell your journey, and you'll find your tribe that wants to follow that.
Yeah, I think we're running into the beautiful connectivity issues that sometimes happens when it comes to going on live and doing technology. But I don't know if are you back? Okay. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining me tonight. I think that this is something that a lot of people kind of had questions about. I think when they view other people on social media, they see some people are really successful while they might be struggling. So I think that a lot of the things that we covered would be very helpful to those people that are interested in growing. So I really appreciate you jumping on here and doing this with me after your long work day. Yeah. Let's see if we can get him back on real quick just so we can kind of wrap things up. You back?
There we go.
Awesome.
Sorry, for some reason I couldn't hear you. Okay, well, I guess we'll jump back in just to wrap it up.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I was just kind of saying thank you so much. I think that a lot of people have been like viewing other people's social media and seeing people grow. And I think that we touched on a lot of topics that will really be helpful for people who are interested in growing, or it might have raised some people's awareness of some of the things that they might be doing that might be hurting or hindering them from growing online, whether it's a business or just a personal brand.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm thank you so much for letting me join and have this conversation. If I can ever help anyone, I'm always willing to, to talk about it. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Awesome. Well, I will let you go so that you can finish out the rest of your night. Thank you so much, and hopefully we can do something like this again in the future.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you so much. Take it easy, everyone.
Yep. Have a good one.